G'day. Welcome to an interview with. I'm David Applegate, author of the book The Boyhood of Cade, book one of The Empire of Elves. And welcome to Future Fantasy. Welcome today, Donna Sundblad, author of Dragonborn. Okay, Donna, introduce yourself to the audience.
Okay, I've worn many hats, but since we're here to talk about my book, I thought I would just start with writing. I didn't really take it seriously until I was almost 50. I had written a novel while I was in my 40s, but it was a Star Trek novel, and it was a learning experience. It took me 5 years because I got stuck and I put it on a shelf and that was eating at me. And I did finish it. And so I did learn a lot from that. I learned I could finish it. I had someone tell me, wow, this is like a real book when they read it. And I thought, well, it is a real book. But I also learned that fan fiction is not the way to go because there's only one publisher and you had to have an agent. And I didn't have any of that. And so I learned from that, but I also learned I needed to work on my writing. And so I joined a place called Writers Village University online, took classes. And the thing that really helped me there most was they have study groups. So like I joined a fantasy study group where you got peer reviews with your work. And so you learned and you grew. And that's how I really got started.
Now, when did you realize you wanted to be a writer? What struck you?
Well, I was a storyteller from the time growing up. I was the oldest of 7 kids, and I used to entertain with the stories. They were like episodes. I had these characters called the Moon Dogs, and they had these episodes that were interactive with the kids. Did we call an ambulance? Was somebody hiding? Did they, so they would join in on it. And as I grew older, I still wanted to write. I was interested in writing stories down, but I married young, had kids young, and life took over, and that just sort of went on the back burner.
It does. But I mean, part of the experience of storytelling, I think, is having life experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, tell me about Dragonborn.
Well, Dragonborn is it's got time travel elements, and it's a story of humans and dragons working together. There's a book it's a living book, and it's evil, and it will take over a host, and the dragons realize they need the humans' help to fight this evil. And the story takes off when there is a human that decides to go to the dragons to have a curse removed. And they agree to do it, but for him to enter into the labyrinth of times to remove it, they have to take the oath to join the dragons in this fight against the evil. And it requires them to travel back in time to help try and change the future. And so it's a story of great sacrifice and working toward the greater good, and sometimes learning to get along with, I mean, not all the dragons were on board with working with humans. They were like, humans, the lowly humans, but gradually they develop relationships, and it's an adventure. It's a story of love, and it's a story that can be for all ages.
I think fantasy does appeal broadly. There are niches within that. Where, you have high fantasy where you stick to the traditional formula of elves, dwarves, humans, dragons.
Right.
And where do you fall into that? Is it just humans and dragons, or are there other races involved?
There are 3 races of dragons involved. And other than that, it's humanoids, basically. I don't have any other races. The thing that it makes it interesting is that in the time travel element, the golden horn dragons are sentinels of the Midlands who travel between times. The Thornose dragons travel through the labyrinth of times, and they can travel past, future, and the Icewing dragons travel through the shadows of time. And so there are all these three different elements, and they have to work together to try to overcome the evil in this book, because it can sense things, but because they can travel through time, it sort of keeps things a little confused as far as being tracked.
What do you do to prepare for a new book?
That's a good question. I think that most of the time an idea gives birth, and that can be through anything from personal experience, nature, history, a writer's prompt. The Dragonborn series actually started, I wrote a short story, and it was about these kids in sort of like a homeschool situation, and they were learning history, but they were learning this as a fantasy when it was actually their history, but their mind, magic had been used, so they don't realize that they're in hiding. And so I started asking questions of why are they there? Where are they? Who are they? And as I answered all those questions, I realized, oh, this isn't the first book. I have to lay all of this groundwork. And so that part of the story is actually in book 4 in the series.
Yeah, there's always groundwork to be laid, world building with any fantasy. Pardon me.
Yeah.
Any fantasy novel, particularly when you're establishing races and their relationship, because it's important to know why, like traditionally with elves and humans, of course, it's the humans grew more populous, started taking land off the elves. The elves at first could fight back, but as their numbers dwindled and the human population pushed them out. But you don't get that sense with Tolkien, but more traditional tales. But elves is very universal. So are dragons, ghouls, zombies. There's a lot of things that are universal
Right.
concepts that fantasy can reach, particularly with magic.
That's one thing that's interesting. Even though I just have humanoids, as the story progresses, magic originated with the dragons, and the Dragonborn received part of the dragon power. And not everyone has the same powers. It depends on what they get.
Yeah, there is that legend. There is actually legend behind that, I think, in the Japanese, although there are made-up words and made-up concepts. Some of them are fantasy stories. There's folklore. A lot of folklore doesn't include magic, except there are elements, like there's insinuations of supernatural events, gods. I mean, you see that more with Greek and more traditional folklore. But you go back to the older folklore. You have the Japanese Indians known as the Ainu, and they talk of the rope people, and the mysteries around them. So there's a lot of insinuation throughout older folklore that there is an element of magic and awe and wonder, like the Toltecs and later the Aztecs. They built pyramids to reach the gods.
Right.
They talk of the gods as living beings that once walked amongst them. There's ancient Indian texts, thousands of years old, that refers to an even older kingdom of Rama, where he ruled on a golden throne. So
that's interesting that you say that, because I have a historical element within this story, because one of the portals leads to the Shoshone Native Americans before the white man's time. And so the dragons and some of the characters go there. And so they are looked at, especially the dragons, being one of the spirit guides.
Yeah. I don't remember how. I know there were some tribes with dragons. I don't think it was universal with all the tribes. I know it was Comanche who got from the actually referred to the dragons as the serpent.
And well, when I was doing the research, you know how you have to research all of this stuff.
Yes.
And so I used their belief in the Thunderbird, because of the sound that they could make this sounded like thunder with their wings. And so
the Thunderbird equates to the rock of the Middle East, and there's also the Rainbird. There was the I forget the other one in Mexico. There was Mexico, the Thunderbird, the Rain God, and I'm not sure if it was the warrior. I think the second warrior. You know, you have the first warrior, second warrior, third warrior, because each one is different. You know,
right.
You have the warrior who attacks. You have the warrior with the club. You have the warrior with the archer.
Right.
You have the warrior with fists. You know, they did have different warrior gods. You know, but what are your inspirations?
Well, my imagination is my biggest inspiration, but really going for a walk, nature. There was a time when one of my books, as I went for a walk, I looked down at the road the ditch next to the road, and I thought, so if I was an inch tall, what would that landscape look like? And that started me down a whole trail that ended up leading me to the idea for this book. So inspiration is all around us. You can watch people, you can hear a conversation, go to a second-hand store and see some antique item that you got a story.
Just a few days ago, they published the first color image of an atom. Like when I was a kid, you wouldn't even think. The microscope, you can see a grain of sand, you know. Now they could go, this is what an atom looks like. And it's like, wow, it's a hexagon. It's a hexagonal. It's a hexagonal. And, you know, there was scientists who are right now tearing out their hair, you know, because everything they thought about electrons and protons and neutrons, poof. You know, and I think that's where magic comes in. Magic is that all-encompassing explanation. There's the, you know, that it's the magic is the laws of physics when they break. You know.
So I heard it put this way: magic is like the science and science fiction for fantasy.
Yeah, so it really is.
It has to make sense. It can't just be, oh, I'm in a pickle here, I need to figure out how to get out of this, so I'll just make this magic. No, there's got to be rules in how it works.
Unless you're writing a children's show, then they throw the rule books out because plot.
Because there's not time usually to lay down how things work.
Yeah,
for the kids. Yeah.
So you get superheroes. You know, if Superman's so strong, why doesn't his punch remove people's heads? You know, and exactly. When you don't have rules, you don't have a universe that will last. You don't have anything that will last.
Right.
I mean, people talk about the continuity of the MCU, and I say, well, yeah, but if you break it down, it's just cowboys. It's just cowboys and fistfights. It's just barroom fistfights. It's just cowboys. It's just Western fantasy, and pretty much, you take away most of the fantasy elements, and it falls apart. And whereas real fantasy, the magic is the glue, but if you took magic out, there's still the story still can flow,
Right.
because
there needs to be the reason for the magic. The reader needs to understand when this happens, it's because of this, or this is going to be the result, or oh, they shouldn't have done that because I know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't understand, but I have the belief that magic and science could have coexisted, but there isn't enough understanding of why we have magic in our past and we don't have it now. There's enough folklore and enough stories to say these few people did these few amazing things, and the only explanation is magic.
So in Dragonborn, there is a push by some of the prophets to ban magic.
Yeah.
And so there's a conflict there. And yet they can scry, they can see the future. And so one of the characters says, and they don't see that as magic?
Yeah. So it does. You've got to define. Magic is hard to define. So,
right.
One group, it's like, could you imagine if magic existed and someone just said, I'm going to patent it and I'm going to be the only one who uses it for X amount of time. And then my company, and, it would create such a conflict. Yet we see, it is the technology and it is the science of fantasy. And when you delve into fantasy, it really does lend itself to many more story paths than you would say a superhero or a Western or a crime drama.
Right.
It's despite the fact that it's not despite the fact that 80% of books are romance, I think fantasy makes the most cultural impact.
I do too, but I am amazed how many people don't like fantasy. And not that they hate it, but I'll have somebody that doesn't love fantasy and they'll read it and they go, that sure is imaginative. It's like, well, yeah, it's fantasy.
Yeah, that's what fantasy is. It's to have,
right.
It's to express your imagination.
Yep.
Where science fiction is, I'm trying to guess what science is and I'm trying to be rounded. I'm saying, well, here's something that most science fictions get wrong. A knife does more damage than a 9mm. Yet, in every book, bang, oh, he's dead. Bang, he's dead. That's not how it works. Even, what's your handgun? A BMG,
It's like that.
Exploding bullets or something.
Right. It's like when they used to do the karate chop and people were knocked out just by one karate chop on their shoulder and they were laying on the ground.
Yeah, it's like people have an off button. I walk up behind them,
That's why they came up with the Vulcan nerve pinch or neck pinch.
To try and explain it. Well,
right.
Vulcans can do this. But now you're turning from science fiction to science fantasy.
Right.
That's my realm. And of course, the science fantasy is a large, encompassing genre in itself, where you have Star Wars is a science fantasy. It's space wizards.
Yep.
It's samurai. Those pretty much cover inspirations, and I hope people get really inspired when they write, because if you're not inspired, you write what you've read before. When you're inspired, you create something new.
Right.
Do you have a favorite writer or a particular book you like?
Well, going way back, The Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey, I really, really enjoyed that whole series. And I liked Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game series. Both of those were were some real favorites. I thought that their world building and how it made sense was just so interesting. And then of course the characters and the fact that the dragons and the people could communicate, it was really good. But today I read a lot of indie writers because there's a lot of good writers out there. And one of my goals is to support other writers. And a couple of authors that I've read this year that were really good that are from Australia. One of them is Philip Barker, and he's not a fantasy writer. His is more of a contemporary young adult, and it's about it's really a story of overcoming and coming of age, and it has to do with rock climbing and being in a competition, and you just end up caring so much about the characters. It's so well done. And the first book is called Climb, and the second one is called Climb Harder, and there's going to be a third one. It's the Ashley Davis series. And then the second book is a fantasy, or it's really two more books that I've read. And I'm trying to, let me look here at my notes here. I'm trying to remember that I don't want to say the wrong name. The Albatar Chronicles. And it's Leonie Rogers, and her books are a story about a young girl living in a part of the world that's like secreted away, and the people there have to decide if they're going to serve the lady. And it's a story about these like the monsters are called gorgons, and it's almost like they're demonic, and it's a fight between good and evil, and these young people have to decide they're going to serve, and then they find out what they're going to do. And so she found out she was going to be a hunter, which she's sort of a little chubby and short and not seeing herself in that way, and it just ends up being a really good plot story and a lot of action.
Yeah, and Japan has an entire genre called a slice of life. They don't really have a defined genre for young adult, but they have young male, but they have it's broken down into 0 to 6, up to 14, and then 14 plus. So it's
hard.
And they have male, female genres. They have a lot of genres, but the fact is that what some of the books you described really fit into slice of life, and that is, I think, the core of, if you have a main protagonist, you should, as a rule, try to give a few slices of their life.
Right.
The whole book doesn't have to be a slice of their life, but the main protagonist, I think, a slice of life, whether it's science fiction or fantasy, is definitely missing in some books these days. It's just, hi, I'm Thor, boom,
Right.
And they're talking about the last mission or the next mission or the mission, they really, boom, 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 no story, no plot.
Right.
5 fights, 8 beats.
People say, what formula do you use? And it's like, yeah, I don't do that.
No, exactly. If I'm writing, if I was to write a play or a screenplay, I would say, no, it doesn't fit your 8-beat arc for a movie, although you can condense it, because I like the comparison. This is the book you read. This is the movie you watch,
Right.
The book you read, the movie you watch. Right. And unfortunately, I think too many people only want the movie you watch because it's pretty pictures. That's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dragonborn is definitely slice of life. You follow these people that go, it's a man and a woman separately coming to the past, and they're thrown into working together. And they end up growing a family and everything. It's a really good story.
Yeah, because there's too much action adventure and not enough life. And, I know I'm beating a drum. I know that, slow burns don't interest a lot of people these days. But now and again, you'll have a fantasy novel that comes out and people will flock to it and everybody will say, this is wonderful. Oh, yes, don't worry that it's a slow burn. Oh, yes, the story takes 3-4 books to get going. And you think, you should read more. And because that's normal life. The world, that's in fantasy, all that world building, all those slice of life tales about Pippin going off into the forest and falling in love with somebody and finding out, and then having to deal with the misery of finding out that it's his cousin. But that's a real story, and that's a real tale that people are missing out on because they just want to see the
action,
the elves slaughter orcs basically in Tolkien, and then the humans come in and say we won, and everybody just that's it. It's just when it's all action, you don't have a story,
right? So you need some action, but it's not regular life. If your writing mimics regular life, how much of your regular life is the action and how much is the slice of life?
Yeah. Try to figure that out and say, well, geez, I should only have 3 action scenes, shouldn't I? Yes. The first meeting, the first fight, and the last fight. That's it. You should really give, I made that mistake too. You should really give more time to the enemy. A lot of people don't do that. And
it is hard. One of my things that I have to fight when I'm writing is I want to fix the bad guy. I don't want him to stay bad, but he has to be a bad guy for the story to work.
Yeah. What research do you do when you prepare to write?
Well, for Dragonborn, because it's pre-industrial, I did a lot of. I'd have to look up, well, how would they do this? How would they do that? In everyday life. Now, I was fortunate that I actually knew my great-grandparents. And when we would go to their farm, they had no electricity. They didn't have running water. So I actually, as a child, witnessed living that way. So there's a lot of things that I did know as far as like daily life. But also, to make the magic work, if you're going to use magic to build a bridge over the river, okay, how does a bridge go together? Not that you have to say it, oh, then you this and that, but you have to show it coming together. So, and you need to know enough to do it. And another thing, trying to decide, going through a portal, does that have a feeling? Does that have a smell? Trying to research things to help me decide what smell to give. Is it different when they travel future versus traveling in the past? It has to be consistent. You just look up so many things, you can't even tell them all.
Yeah, well, researching and creating portals is something that is a real scientific research. And they all talk about, since Tesla, the smell of ozone.
Right.
And if you haven't smelled ozone, you don't know what the smell is. But it's that smell you get after a lightning strike.
Right. And trying to describe the smell.
Yes.
Because if it's a pre-industrial, you can't say it smells like ozone.
Yeah. It's that smell in the air, like after a lightning strike. That's how I picture it. I don't know of any other instance, unless you want to say they burnt mercury and they go, burnt mercury?
The other thing I did, I had to do a lot of research as far as the Shoshone people, and
absolutely,
because they're part, that I had to know the geography of where they were living and what they believed and how they lived.
Yeah, and I don't know, probably, there's when earlier I referred to the Comanche, and unfortunately, they're not a single group. So one belief in one particular, but it's not the same.
Well, even the Shoshone, there's like 3 different groups. So I had to know this is the group.
Yeah. But when you go to research some of these groups, there are like mentions of this is the beliefs and stories that we collected at this time.
Right.
And they're incomplete because a lot of people still today don't put their folklore to paper. And I think they fail to understand that's how our own folklore got corrupted. When you had too many people telling too many different stories. But, I think there's a difference between folklore and storytelling. So you could say, yes, you're storytellers, you're telling a story. But when you're telling folklore, you're trying to pass on your history.
Right.
Pardon me. What advice would you give to new writers?
Well, first of all, if you're thinking of writing, don't put it off. And don't be afraid to let other people read your writing. I think that when I went to Writers Village and had to start putting my stuff out there for other people to read, when I first posted that first time, my heart was beating so fast. I was just like thinking, what am I going to do if they don't like it? Well, I can tell everybody, not everybody's going to like your writing. So write for yourself, write what you love, write what you know. For me, I didn't think I had time. I kept putting it off. And when I decided I was really going to do it, I thought, okay, I'll try and set aside 20 minutes a day, 3 days a week. And I quickly learned, once I started writing, I had a lot more time to write than I realized. And today, I recommend that people set goals, because there's that old saying that if you aim at nothing, you always hit it. So at least set realistic goals, something you can measure. Things like, I'm going to write 3 times a week for 20 minutes, and you'll actually accomplish it. So each year I set goals at the beginning of the year. And then from those yearly goals, I set my monthly goals. And then each Monday, I set goals based on those monthly goals, so that what I'm doing is I'm chiseling away at what I want to accomplish in the year in little pieces. And it helps you when you feel like you're not getting anything done. You can look back and go, oh, look at all this stuff I actually did accomplish.
Yeah, exactly. I think, what is it? 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day. 10 lines. There's your paragraph. Break it up. Maybe make it 3. There's your 10 points. Don't have a plot. Start with 10 points.
Right.
Try to narrow it down to 8. Then break it down. Right. There's 3 chapters each. There's a whole book. There's 75,000 words or less is a light novel.
Right.
75,000 to 125,000 is your average novel. After that, you get into epics, and if you start writing lots, well, you've got yourself a series.
Right. So I'm actually almost done with book 2 of Dragonborn. The title is Shadow Walkers. I'm hoping it'll be out early sometime next year. I got the cover artist working on the cover.
I think these days most people are spending more on the cover than they are advertising, and with good reason. I don't see any value in anybody's platform these days. I mean, you get more views posting your own tweet than you do buying a tweet.
Right. So, and that's another thing. Once you have something like that, to set goals toward spending some time on social media just for that purpose.
Yeah. And most of the people who are going to buy your book are other writers, everybody. What is it? Game of Thrones, the book only sold 118,000 copies. Though Harry Potter did sell millions, most of those to bookstores.
Right.
Unless you get a bookstore deal, never approach. Anybody approaches you and they're not prepared to put up the money 100%, and that they're an agent and they're going to take 20% or less, you're better off being on your own. Don't listen to anybody who can say I'm an expert digital marketer, because that is the all they're doing is what you do on social media.
Right.
Nobody can get you an audience. They can get you views, but they can't get you sales.
Yeah, that's the key right there. And that's another bit of advice for people who want to write. Do it because you love it. Don't do it because you think you're going to get rich.
Yeah, there's a few. I know a few. I see, you probably see the ads too. There's a few on Twitter who post, write 14, XYZ novels, these 14 plots will get you, bestseller. But you look at them and they're plotting away, 60, 70 page books. They're not really books in the traditional sense. And they're not even stories. They're just a particular. Most of them are sexual, but there are a few who, they're little slice of the life novels, about somebody cooking a meal and wandering their mind. There's a. I'm not saying they're bad, but what I'm saying is, if you can produce a well described scene like that, why don't you make it a proper book?
Right. I actually did ghostwriting also, and I probably have 12 books out there without my name on it that are Western mail order bride romance.
Yeah.
And it had historical elements and all that, and it was, and I got paid to do it, so that's why I did it. But I thought, these stories are just so predictable because you follow the pattern that they want you to, even though each story was unique and historically had some new aspect to it, it's pretty predictable because it's pretty much always the same outcome.
Yeah. I think, however, there's a large number of people out there whose idea of fantasy is romance, and, unfortunately, the concept. I'm not knocking the genre if you enjoy it. I'm knocking it on the point is, why don't you enjoy something else? I see, as a writer and a reader, I don't confine myself to, oh yes, I'm waiting for the next Star Trek novel, because I've read a lot of them, and I go, well, I'll try some Star Wars, then I'll try, and I've tried some military science. I've actually read a few romance novels. I'm trying to think of the other, Inseki from Japan. Other world. I read the Sword Art Online, the night novels. Some you do get. Boy gets transferred to other world, meets girl, builds harem, defeats the dragon. That does become predictable. There are some genres, where it's predictable. Military science, humans land on a planet. Well, goodbye, planet. Nice knowing you. There goes the neighborhood, says the aliens.
So I like a touch of romance within the slice of life part of fantasy.
Yeah, well, but romance should be a subcategory.
Right.
I honestly think that. I honestly think there's just too much romance, and I think too many people are reading romance to fill a void, not to actually entertain themselves. But then again, you get the people who read crime novels, and they're the second biggest. And
Right.
wow, so Detective Poirot solves the crime yet again. What a shock! Oh, it's a single clue. There's only one there's Turkish cigarettes, and there's only one place that sells them.
Right.
Yeah. I used Google. There were hundreds of stores back then that sold Turkish cigarettes. They were very popular in London after the war.
Right. Yep. It has to be believable. And that's sometimes when I review, and I've had people say, why didn't you give it a 5? And I'll say, well, that relationship went from 0 to 100 within like 2 pages. And that's just not realistic.
Unless, I can give examples where it is realistic in my own, where you have a purposed introduction for the purpose of 2 people who know, yep, this is the
not somebody crashed into you.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying when it's the culture and the custom.
Oh yeah.
When you get the parents to say, this is your future bride.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
That's the only time it works. Otherwise, it's, I'm walking through the supermarket, I bump into the hottest lady in town, and next thing you know, we're in coffee, having coffee.
Right.
Like,
yeah, I had one within 3 days. They were so in love, and it was like that was their soulmate.
The only time that happens in real life is when she's getting down your details for the sexual harassment lawsuit. But one of the things people don't understand, and I think every writer does, it's stressful.
Yep.
And how do you deal with it?
Well, the main thing I do is I make sure that I get up and walk away from the computer. And I find that actually can help rejuvenate my creativity. When I walk out my front door, if I turn right, there's a hill. And a lot of times, once an hour, I'll go out the door and I'll walk up that hill around a cul-de-sac and come back down. And it might take me, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. And during that time, it's like I can totally get back to where I need to be, because you can be stuck, or you can just feel like I'm under pressure. I want to get this scene done and it's not working or whatever. And it really helps me to step away from the computer. And I read.
And I read. Yep. I think that's the most common one.
I enjoy cooking.
Most people call stress writer's block. Writer's block is when your brain is telling you that it needs to process. You have to let your brain process. If you make stuff up, your brain still has to process it.
Right.
We don't understand our own bodies. We're stumbling around in the dark. But when you're creating something, I think after the first hour, your brain is going, I need to process this. That's what I'm thinking what stress is. It's telling you have to go eat, you have to go drink, you have to let your mind center, you have to understand, because you've got all this data and it has to go through and say, what of this is important? What do I have to keep? So you've got to let your brain process.
So one of the things I also do is I'll work on more than one thing, because I blog and stuff like that. I'll think, all right, I'm going to step away from working on the book and I'm going to write a blog post. And because it's something totally different, I can write that, get the draft done. And by the time I'm done, I'm usually ready to go back to the book because I figured out what I need to do.
The meme of the guy walking down the street with the hottest brunette in this town, and a blonde walks past. That's writers with books and ideas,
Yeah.
I've got my bestseller right here, and that's interesting. But it happens to everybody, I think also, again, we need to process. As much as you like a certain book, you'll only read it probably 3 or 4 times in your lifetime. And this is why I advise people, one of the best ways to deal with stress is read a book not in your genre.
Right.
Get your mind thinking, get your mind processing, it's centering. if anybody's done meditation, you center, you clear the mind, get rid of the clutter, and you're back.
And another thing, I really enjoy getting together with other people. We probably at least 2 times a week, we get together with other people around the table and share a meal and just visit, like the old days when people actually got together and just talked. And sometimes we talk about my book, and a lot of times we don't, but just hearing about life and all of that, I think that it really just helps center you and get you back to square one.
That's it. I think people spend too much time together. And one of the mistakes people make is they mistake their work life for their life. Their work friends, they try to romanticize their work friends. They try to imagine if they could compact it all into one. Oh, he'd make a better husband, but and whereas in reality, that's not how our minds work. The things we love the most, we spend the least amount of time with, but when we do, that's when our creativity is high. That is when our emotions are high, and we have to have that gap on our own where we process everything before that to get rid of the clutter, to get into to relax, to get rid of the clutter, to process your day, to be centered, and then you go and enjoy the best 2 or 3 hours of your life with friends, family, and loved ones.
Yeah,
and that is how we get, because we spend nearly a third of our entire life asleep.
right. And when you think about the whole work thing, I don't know about you, but I have found that even when I have good relationships with the people I work with, when you don't work there anymore, you don't hear from them most of the time. I mean, I still touch base with a few people here and there, but for the most part, that's done.
You leave work and you will suddenly realize, I know nothing about them, and they don't talk about themselves. They talk about their job.
Right.
That's why I detach and say, yep, I'm here to do a job. But of course, I had a breakdown and I can't work anymore. That's stressful on its own. But
right.
What do you do when you're not writing?
Well, I cook. I spend time with nature quite a bit. I feed like the hummingbirds and the birds out front, and I spend time I have a cat and I have a cockatiel, and they both demand a lot of my time. And I spend time with my husband of 53 years, and I still enjoy his company.
That is, I think, probably what we would say these days, you got your shit together. Most people don't. Most people can't figure it out that 99% of all people are not going to think like you. They're not going to act like you. And if they do, they're probably your son looking up to you, copying everything you do until they get to a teenager, and then they're zombies. Zombie apocalypse.
Yep. But they come back.
They come back. Yep. They once they center themselves, I think. Once they center themselves, and this is where I say to people, read a book, and not just my links in the description below, but also Donna's. She's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Smashwords, Apple, Kobo. I think Kobo's audiobook, isn't it?
Kobo is a thing like a Kindle, but I can't remember who makes it.
Yeah, it's a Asian company, I think, or was. I think it's Americanized now. I know it's changed. I know Smashwords changed hands too, but
right.
You got all the links are in the description below. And for full disclosure, this is not a paid interview. I've not paid Donna to appear, and she has not paid me to appear. This is her words. This is, raw and live. warts and all. So people can actually get inspired, know you're right. People do want to know who they're reading. It's just
right.
People want to know your inspirations, and this is, I think, something that inspires me too, reading different people. And you yourself mentioned you do reviews and you've done writing for other people.
And I want to just take a moment to say thank you, David, for doing this interview.
Yeah, you're welcome. I ask everybody to subscribe, share the video, get your video out there, because this is a promotion. This promotes me. This promotes you. The more eyeballs you get, the probability of sales, if you've ever done it, is so low for a book. That's why you rarely see advertising for books. You see them for bookstores now and again, but unfortunately, it is, like you said, don't become a writer because you want to make money. Become a writer because you have a story to tell.
Yes.
And with that, I would say thank you, everybody, for coming. And yeah, buy Donna's book because she deserves it. Okay, ending broadcast.